Welcome back to the next episode of The Next Big Thing. It is my pleasure today. We are joined by Li Jie, who is a technical producer over at Ink Stories. We're shifting gears. We've been doing a lot of episodes on artificial intelligence and those types of technologies. And today, because we are a diversified podcast focusing on tech from as many angles as we possibly can, we're thinking along the lines of gaming, along the lines of Web3. AI certainly touches that. So AI is probably going to come up in the discussion, but it's going to be from a completely different angle than some of our recent episodes. So we hope you like it. And as we do in many cases, I would love Li Jie to bring the audience up to speed in terms of, because a lot of us, myself included, may not necessarily know how does one become a technical producer related to gaming, and then additionally your sort of story, your background that led you to working with Ink Stories as well could be very interesting for us to learn.
Yeah, so funny enough, my background came from film. So a lot of production and producing work I have done is all from film and short film specifically that went through the film festival circuits. And essentially, in 2022, I actually had a deeper dive into Web3 and how tokenomics worked, how blockchain worked in terms of the infrastructure side of things. And then I got an introduction to Ink Stories to help build out their Web3 side because it was something that they were super interested in at. So it became like an intertwining weaving of knowing and understanding of blockchain infrastructures as well as just the back end of tech and innovation to then becoming a technical producer. So that was kind of my small journey in the side of being a part of Ink Stories, as well as producing games on a day to day, from operations side to as well as content.
And when we think of producer, I mean, the common thing that sort of comes up is if you're I admit that I don't necessarily play a lot of games, but I watch and stream a lot of visual content. It could be series, it could be movies, and so you see, executive producer, and there's a whole production team, and you get the impression as someone outside the movie industry that they're just doing everything to essentially get the story on track and make sure all the right resources and the monies and everything is going to the right place. Is it similar in the gaming world when you think producer? It's basically you got to keep everything on track because the behind the scenes is a lot more complex than people like me or some of our audience might even realize.
Yeah, so there's a lot of multiple different areas of producing in games. When I entered in the gaming sector, there's obviously the funding side of producing. And in film, it's called technically executive producer. And then you have a person that just manages budgets, like line producer for film. But in games, you have an actual creative producer, whether if that is to create narrative design, game design experiences, or even just the programming side. So you'll have a similar type project management style role where you operate the day to day of making sure the production, especially when it comes to games, there's so many different levers from animation to general programming to then QAing to even just gathering all the info to provide for the leads or the board members to make sure that everything's on track and the game is on track to make sure it's published out on time. So that's kind of like the overall assumption of it. So yes, there is multiple sides of it. So it's like the producer is mainly the middle ground that is the anchor of the whole entire production.
And it's amazing to think about games. We're essentially recording this during NVIDIA for many years has been doing this conference where they have, maybe in the past it wasn't a few thousand people, but now it is a few thousand people because NVIDIA is quite a famous company, and Jensen Huang, the CEO founder, is
Mhm.
quite a famous business executive. But obviously, you don't become famous overnight. And they founded NVIDIA, in 1992, and they were sort of coming up as a games supporting type company where the graphics processing units were sort of the key things that were responsible for a lot of different companies, really a whole ecosystem, NVIDIA included, to get their start. And there are always, you feel like, certain games that come out that just sort of capture the technical capability, so they could be responsible for rocketing a hardware producer like an Nvidia up through the ranks. And you could see historical examples of that. And Doom was one of the games that came out. This guy John Carmack and I think someone else were working together on this amazing game that sort of shifted the way that people think of what a game could be on a computer. And before that, you were maybe seeing Pac-Man go up and down the screen. And relative to what you can do today, it's obviously, it might look a little bit boring or a little bit historical, but it's amazing to see the connection and the narrative and how certain games have a historical importance. And the reason I mention this is I know you're working at Ink Stories, and the people who have founded Ink Stories have been involved in some of these sort of transformative games that many hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people have potentially played. So I'd love to hear a bit more about how you met the people at Ink Stories and some of their background.
Yeah, so the background in terms of the founders, it is actually Naveed Kansari. So he is a former cinematic director at Rockstar Games. So some of the titles that Chris was trying to mention was Rockstar at Rockstar Games, mainly the actual large franchises, as you know, as GTA, Red Dead. And then you have Alan Wake, who he also helped out in the cinematic production side of things. Um, and essentially he was in charge of a lot of the look and the feel of how games should be. And it's funny, it comes in with the whole motion capture and making sure that you have the latest hardware in terms of GPU, and then motion capture cleanups as well. So he basically was on part of that side, and he played a big pivotal role of how games are now, especially when it comes to narrative campaign experiences. And I do believe, when we, I remember even playing, the old school 2-bit games from the old school Mario's. We had these fun little interactions where they were just two-dimensional, but when you have GPUs that were able to be in generating in a 3D world, that felt really immersive for the players. So the concept of open world games really was pushed with Rockstar, with GTA specifically. And that was like the dopest thing ever, because back in the day, seeing a 3D model, even when they have mitten hands, was the coolest thing ever. But now when you look at it, it just looks so like old school 8-bit style. But yeah, how I met Naveed and the Ink Stories family was through a mutual, and it was through actually a mutual who I've connected it with in the Web3 space. And then essentially, I introduced them on what Web3 and blockchain technology are the benefits within digital assets world for gaming, because there were a bit of different sides of the interest of how this emerging technology can provide for the player, let alone as well as the developer too as well. So that's pretty much the general consensus of how I got introduced.
And in thinking about it, because everyone's going to have, and admittedly, I can date myself, indicating that I remember the old school Nintendo, and I remember when Nintendo went to Super Nintendo, and then suddenly Xbox comes out, and it's this big thing, and I'm in university, and people are playing Halo, Capture the Flag, and so everyone, depending on the years that they might have been at university or in high school, and sort of hit that, similar to music. You're listening to the most music you ever listened to at a certain point, and you're sort of always going back to that. In the gaming world, I'm thinking of Nintendo, Super Nintendo, original Xbox, and if I saw the games available in 2025, I'd probably be like, "Oh my god, this is way beyond anything I can even imagine." And one of the fascinating things, I admit, that was not an option when I was looking at those original platforms, late 1990s, early 2000s, was you could actually do stuff to give your character, whether it's clothes or weapons, like you could buy stuff and own stuff in the game. And the reason I mention that is I think that's one of the things that Web3 is really good at. But someone like me that's thinking in those old school platforms, which were fine at the time, like people were perfectly happy with them, they were reasonably successful, but the environment has changed so that you almost want to express a certain degree of individuality within the game, and almost a customizable experience. And doing it the way it was being done in late 90s, 2000s, you probably can't even imagine that. But doing it in the Web3 world, which is a different world than sort of the more platform based world, where the platform is central to the whole experience, it could create those new options, those new avenues. And would you say, Li Jie, that that's really the core difference of Web3 versus historical, where it's more, again,
Yeah.
centralized, or are
Yeah.
there other details that you would mention as well?
I think in general, when we think of in-game assets, right? Back in the day, with the just with hardware and in the 3D world, being able to customize something, right, was something that was really personable to a player. And then you had competitive esports, from Counter Strike with their guns and skins, to League of Legends, like free to play models that really provided the opportunity for lots of players to purchase in game assets, that were a little bit more decentralized, but it was an experience for the player to feel very personable. But later on down the line, what people actually, many players got really frustrated about was that you would have a lot of these in-game assets that you would purchase, and them not being transferable felt like you were repeatedly buying something over and over again. And because of these lots of these mystery boxes of these skins, you it was really tough for the player itself to not know which skins they were going to get. So having that option, whether the flexibility to be able to transfer an in-game asset, was very pleasing to the player, especially when Web3 games was introduced. And I think that was the biggest thing. I always say this is like the first phase of purchasing digital assets when it was centralized was just an experience for the player, during the last 10 to 15 years. And you saw so many different advances in that side, whether if it's user generated content, from customizing custom skins, and then brand IP partnerships. That really was a big pivotal moment for in-game assets, especially with Fortnite, and their partnerships with different IPs. So that can only reach a certain amount, and now I really do feel that in the next phase of games, you're gonna see definitely a different pivotal moment, how in games assets are gonna be used or at least utilized, within the world, especially trading, trading card games, things like that. That I do see huge potential for it as well.
Do you have a sense in terms of, because one of the things that always surprises me, I admit, is you start thinking along certain lines, and for a lot of, say, wisdom trees experience, we think, for instance, about business software, and so you can go online and you could say, what's the size of the business software market, and then if you're going down a certain function, you might say, how much do people spend on, say, call centers, which call centers gets a lot of attention now because people are debating, can AI replace certain aspects of customer service or not, and how much money does that save? And when you start looking at how much money in general is spent on games, it's a lot bigger than
Yeah.
a lot of people would initially estimate, depending how you're looking at it and for what time period. It could actually even be bigger than certain aspects of business software, rather easily. So you sit there and you think, okay, the total gaming market is huge. And then you sit there and you mentioned Fortnite. The amount of money, I don't know if you would know this off the top of your head, but the amount of money that changes hands based on people not say buying access to the game or anything, but more buying those custom things that make their character unique and make it more an expression of themselves, is a much bigger number as well, from what I've heard it anecdotally, than people would realize. And that's just one
Yeah.
game. So I'm just curious your sense of the actual amount of market size here, to give people a
Yeah.
sense of like basing it on something.
Well, specific numbers, I won't know, but I do know that from year to year, the gaming industry has grown. And it actually, from compounding, at least it grows at least within the 5 to 10% range annually, year to year. And this includes from mobile games, and not just regular individual titles like Fortnite, Roblox, of in-game assets, but other parts of the industry, from VR to mobile to hardware like Xbox to PlayStation, from individual campaign titles. So majorly the large part of the gaming industry where revenue is generated at this current moment is mobile games as well as free to play. So that's why you're seeing in the last 5 years where a lot of free to game concept games are, especially indie titles like Fall Guys, became a huge running factor because it's a successful model, and it provided at least a good amount of money uh, to the studios, as well as a good amount of push within user onboarding, especially with women, female gamers too. And that's also has been a big growth too as well annually, because we saw a very heavily male dominated industry in terms of viewers, in terms of players, sorry. And now in the last 3 years, you're seeing the growth of female players as well.
So I admit that my wife is a huge Candy Crush fan. So I'm imagining Candy Crush is like the pinnacle, or one of, because I the fact that I've even heard of it is saying something. So it's one of these, you see the mobile game and
Yeah.
stuff is happening. What was it? Because you sort of hit on something that I admit I don't know much about, which is this idea that, well, I did know or would have predicted gaming male dominated. I could easily see that. But what was it that drew in more of a female audience and female players in recent years? What were some of those changes?
I think the biggest thing was the direction of narrative and art as well. You're starting to see like subtleness of, like, for example, when Fall Guys came out, there was this subtle cuteness of art direction and art style. And that kind of brought additional attraction. Even like games like Candy Crush, when you saw like all these cute different styles of art, and even pushing different styles of games, um, that that also kind of brings an attraction to a woman in general because you know, as much as I love racing games, it would not be my sense of therapy to because games are an escapism for players. That's they want to be the person playing Hitman. They want to be the person playing the gangster. They want to be the racer. So finding different type of style games that will that I've noticed was that in the last 3 years, that's when the market changed a little bit, where there's provided subtle cuteness of games, as well as main lead ideas. Like now, I do know that GTA, the new GTA, will have the leading character as a female. Um, and that kind of just provides a little bit of an incentive for women to at least give like that perspective of what a POV of a woman could be, or just things like that. Kind of just pushes that edge of why girls want to play games a little bit more. And then you have stories like even Last of Us, with Elle and Joel, those two characters. Even though she struggled a lot, but you could see a lot of that perspective too as well. So that's why you're seeing a lot more female players on into the gaming industry now.
You mentioned the racing games. I remember that from Need for Speed growing up. That was a classic right before Gran Turismo and all of that. Um, Now, another angle that you mentioned, and a lot of us, again, outside of the specific gaming world, what we saw was we heard this term metaverse getting thrown around. We saw CEO of Facebook now, Meta Platforms, refocusing the company, spending a certain very large amount of money on a per year basis on developing the metaverse. You saw certain brands making sure that they were controlling their assets in the metaverse. And some of us are looking at it like, oh my gosh, like, what is this metaverse? Does it really even exist? And in thinking of the metaverse, and you mentioned VR and AR as well, virtual reality, augmented reality, and we're kind of on this. It feels like a precipice where that Apple has their headset and Meta or Oculus has their headset, and then you have the glasses, which have been viewed relatively positively in recent months. Is the hardware for VR and AR at a point where you imagine we're going to start seeing some very interesting new experiences?
uh in terms of the in metaverse in the in-game world, I we aren't there yet.
Mm, mm.
Specifically on the VR side, it takes a lot of processing power. Unfortunately, with the Oculus, like especially the recent years, RAM and GPU has been the biggest downfall when it comes to graphics within the VR headset. So we are very early on into the stage, but what I have seen in the last year, especially with the Apple headset being launched, a lot of AR mixed reality experiences and puzzler type style games have been a quite successful way to for someone to enjoy games on a hardware like something like that. But the metaverse and the whole concept of that, I think, kind of just really was the hype of the whole Web3 games, and the building out of an infrastructure that can potentially use as like a transferable asset within one brand and IP. So that was kind of the whole concept of Web3 and the metaverse. But I do see that in the long run, it's a lot of the key players right now. Even when I went to Consensus, they are trying to figure out what's the it IP within the metaverse world that can really bring people into the games. Just like how Fortnite was the IP for mainly free to play competitively when it came to esports style games. And so that's kind of right now the biggest bet is figuring out what the IP is for the metaverse. So you're seeing a lot of different companies like Animoca brands building out their Mochaverse, which has a little bit of a more illustrated art style. And they're trying to partner up with different IPs like Nike and to see if that can bring a little bit more attraction to the user or for the player to really enjoy. But what I do think that is majorly, the metaverse world can always be considered a metaverse, but I think the most important thing that many developers need to focus on is actually creating good games within the metaverse. They're so focused on the branding and the IP that people tend to lose focus on the idea of why originally people play games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is to genuinely enjoy the actual game and the content within the metaverse. And you're seeing that with in general with Meta and their Oculus, they're trying to build out their fitness world. And that might be the user base that they're trying to attract, which is getting into the metaverse world from Meta. And then you're doing a lot of fitness activities to kind of, target that audience. Because there's a lot of big, for specifically for the VR side, there's a big audience based on just the fitness side of it.
That's it's interesting you mentioned fitness because there's the company Peloton, and I'm among their subscribers, and you sort of saw their trajectory in 2020 and 2021, and I think like many companies, there was a lot of excitement and hype, and a thought that okay, the equipment is so great, nobody's ever going to need to go back to the gym, and maybe that wasn't the most accurate prediction. And so, on the one hand, they had all these bikes and they had all this inventory, and people can pull up the share price chart and they see it went way up, it went way down. But on the other hand, there was a certain stickiness of the users which is extremely valuable. Now, if you completely mispredict your inventory cycle, it's not valuable enough to like completely alleviate that, as you can see from the share price. But on the other hand, the community that follows. So in the Peloton world, you follow usually certain instructors, which are these sort of big key personalities. To my knowledge, still actual people, not AIs yet. But I think you've hit on something. Maybe Meta has hit on something. The excitement, the passion that people take to their fitness experience. And again, once you get into that routine, I know I'm a prime example. You get into that routine, and you're just doing it a certain number of times a week, almost without fail, and you feel bad to
Yeah.
not do it. So the fitness world is a very interesting sort of entree into all of this.
Yeah, and especially for hardware, right? If you think about it, like you're asking someone to wear a headset, a big
Mm.
headset onto your head. It's no, people would prefer, casual players would prefer to be on their phone or on their Xbox or PlayStation and on their PC. But majorly, if someone who's in fitness, they don't mind wearing a headset or even just a fit tracker because that's what they wear on a daily basis to track things. So that sector or that target audience is really really reasonable, and why Meta's pushing on that.
Now, something, I mean, we alluded to it at the outset, and admittedly, as I said on this podcast, we talk a lot about artificial intelligence, and you have even certain movies and science fiction stories getting positioned where the idea of the non-playable character within games has been evolving. And the reason I mention that is it's very easy to sort of picture and think, okay, years ago, a non-playable character would just sort of walk in a circle and just be there, and you imagine them almost as like animated art that is improving the look and feel, but not really doing anything. And it feels like today, what these non-playable characters can do can completely evolve, be different. A different player doing different stuff could maybe see completely different outcomes. And what you're dealing with when you think of AI in games today feels completely beyond anything that probably would have been imagined 5 or 10 years ago. So I'd love to hear more about what you're seeing when you start thinking of the intersection between AI and games.
Well, yeah. There has been a interesting area of AI in games. I think in the industry at this current moment, people are, seeing AI in games as a negative. But as a developer, I think it's actually a positive, especially for the player. When in the early days of AI, if you think about it, it provided predictability, right? When you had the 2-bit games, like Space Invaders, it predicted where the player would go. And then in 3D world, we would have villains of NPCs that would either shoot you, so it's predicting where you would shoot. So then it brings an additional challenge. AI has always been in games, and right now at this moment, there has been an understanding that unfortunately us players are a little bit more smarter now
Mm-hmm.
than AI. So what can we do to bring the player additional challenges, right? To to actually have the player to be more intrigued within the game is what we want to ask on a daily basis as a game developer. So you're seeing now many games trying to incorporate AI that provide a little bit of a more custom experience. So when I say custom, I mean letting the player kind of have a brain in terms of the NPC side. So when you interact with an NPC, it remembers you, it remembers your conversations. So then it doesn't repeat the same thing over and over again. And then it could be whether if it's an open world, having one mission, when you trigger one mission and you complete one mission, that another mission may not be fully locked and you can fully interact with it fully. And then uh, letting that person within the game world understand, like the NPC side, understand and remember all your actions that you had in the previous missions. Because usually one-off campaigns, it's kind of like written now and predicted, especially for game designers and narrative writers. They have like these three options that can trigger an NPC to tell you, hey, if this player went onto this mission, can you reply back to this dialogue? Which, if you were to play the game 3 times, you will kind of know exactly what the NPCs are going to say, or in general, what the NPCs are going to interact and do. So I definitely do see a little bit more of a dynamic storytelling in the long run with AI NPCs, and as well as voice recording too, as well, to have a little bit more of a dynamic range instead of just a very triggered voice recording. And that could be a chicken and egg, because a lot of people are like, I just want a one-off experience and that's all I want. But I definitely see, especially for like open world style games, you want to have that vibrant world of daily different interactions with NPCs.
Now, something I was curious about, because you hear about AI sort of helping with certain things in movies, and some of the narratives make a lot of sense. For instance, if you used to have to say blow up a car to get a certain special effect, you would literally have to have the car and the full staff of people and the fire safety, and it would look really cool, and I imagine it would be fun and as long as it's safe and everything is taken care of, a great overall experience. But at the same time, you're like, oh, we didn't set the camera up right. We got to do it again. That can get very expensive.
Yeah.
So if you could do it and it actually looks feasibly real, quote unquote, real enough, just simulated on a system using AI to essentially simulate blowing up a car, then you can adjust the camera angles and you could do whatever you want to do completely within sort of that post production environment. And so, one of the things I was wondering in the gaming world, I imagine the storytelling is sacred, and AI may not be yet at a point where it could like create a compelling narrative and story and get people really excited based on the storyline. But then there's all the other stuff that also takes a lot of time. And I'm imagining or wondering if AI is helpful once you've defined the story at, doing all the rendering and the details and making the rest of the game experience possibly a bit better.
Yes, 1000%. AI has definitely helped in game production side of things. I I actually have tapped in within our production pipeline that we've done a little bit of motion capture cleanup. Um, with motion capture cleanup, it can be really sticky, especially trying to manually keyframe cleanups, and using AI to predict where movements are when you record post has been a truly time-saving process. And then not only that, you're seeing actually you're able to build out simple mechanics using AI in programming, especially when it comes to the 3D world side of things. So building out 3D art assets, that's a bigger play that you're seeing to kind of shortcut these worlds because having multiple modelers build out uh, a small setting in Greece for like Assassin's Creed could take months to a year from just one whole specific city. So being able to generate some temporary 3D models within AI, within using AI as well as textures, that helps tremendously. And in the last year, you're seeing that, and it's been super helpful to shortcut ways, especially for like indie studios and AA studios as well.
They talked, they being Nvidia, throughout their history, they talked about using certain elements to indicate how far along a given capability was. And one of the ones that stuck in my mind was you create a very nice image. So you mentioned Greece, developing parts of, say, what Athens might have looked like at various points in history, which is really cool to consider because you're almost like, okay, I'm walking through the historical textbook, and the kinds of things that you have to get right to have that immersive experience could be how the light over the course of a given 12 hour, because light is, the sun is shining down for a given 12-hour period, and if the weather is changing, if there's clouds, not clouds, and the light needs to look realistic as it's hitting these different surfaces, stone and dirt and grass. And so they talked a lot about rendering how light is moving through a scene and using the GPU processing power. So part of it is the hardware processing power, part of it is the AI predicting how the pixels need to set up and getting everything right at the same time. It, to a layperson like me, it sounds quite remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, from a old production side of things, you would have a person who just textures the whole entire 3D side of things, and that could take a long time. So when you talk about phases of the sun or the moon, and you're seeing where the textures are shining, yeah, in terms of 3D side, the art side, it literally the actual person who was managing the textures would have to make sure and generate manually to fix each pixel, and having AI to at least predict and help you predict does provide that shortcut, and it's super beneficial for game production. And I'm so I'm so amazed by how NVIDIA has pushed their GPUs, and I definitely like am a huge advocate for AI in games, especially for production, just because the cost of games are so expensive. But not only that, the manpower, it takes a huge load as well. So being able to use AI in games can provide that speedier process, and I'm all for it.
It's been amazing. I mean, last week on Disney Plus, where I am a subscriber, they allowed people to start watching Moana 2. And, I remember Toy Story way back, and how that sort of put Pixar on the map. And what you see in terms of, so some of the things they mention in some of the books, because I'm a kind of a nerd, so I read books about some of these things. They mention how hard it is to deal with hair, and like wind going through the hair, or somebody like going into water and coming out of water. And again, the hair needs to look so that you're not like focused and saying, well, that looked weird. Like the uncanny valley is one of these expressions that people throw around, and it's usually of, oh, that was noticeable because something was quote unquote incorrect. And when you see some of these newer movies, be it Moana 2 or certain others, and what they're able to do, whether it's how water is moving, how hair is moving. I know there was a movie about a cat that but the name escapes me, but it won something in the Oscars recently. It was another sort of animated movie. It's amazing how far we've come
Yeah.
from, if some of you out there like me remember watching Toy Story that first time. It was still good. It doesn't take anything away, but at the same time, you're like, you could not have imagined that quote unquote computer animated movies would
Yeah.
look as they do today.
Yeah. And I don't know if you know the new animated film inspired by League of Legends, Arcane.
That
Um,
you hit on something interesting there. Now it's coming back
yeah.
around, where when I was growing up, you would have the movie, and then they would make the game based on the movie. And admittedly, my brother was very good at actually playing. I was far like The Matrix was a great example. Like you would go through. Now the game can inspire the movie.
Movie.
So
Yeah.
that's a very interesting circle that we've come around as well.
Yeah, it's because of larger audience. League of Legends is so popular in Korea, in Japan, in Singapore. You have the Asia market. What meanwhile in films, especially when it comes to the Marvel films, it's so North American based that you do have that very popular heroes movies in Asia, but it's not well recognized. So game titles, that now you're seeing game titles being launched as films or TV shows because of the large audience and brand awareness of that. And yeah, in terms of the Arcane and League of Legends, they actually used AI in it, in terms of the storyboards and the animations, some of the simple animations that they used. And that kind of like created a different dynamic way of how storytelling could be. So yeah, it there's both benefits of it, and I'm excited for to see how new games are gonna be made, as well as films too, because in the last 3 years, A16Z specifically has put a lot of funding into game and IPs as well, to make sure that things are more distributed widely, not just for games and films, but live immersive experiences and all these different things too as well, to just make sure to have the best uh, audience of supporters within the game industry.
So Li Jie, for sort of our last sort of big concept here, as we are in the back half of our episode, Something I just thought of based on, you're talking about obviously big venture capital firms like A16Z are thinking about this. They're thinking about Web3. There might be people out there where either themselves or among their family members, they might love games and they might potentially have story ideas in mind. And in the past, it might have seemed like, oh my gosh, like I have this idea, but I can never convince EA Sports or, whatever big company to sort of take a flyer on a new game idea. But it feels like a lot of the tools that we're talking about, be it AI, Web3, if somebody has a great idea, do you think it's a bit easier for them to either self publish, get that idea out, get a game to a much higher level than they otherwise would, even if, again, they may not have the same resources as some of these giant companies?
Yeah, 1000%. I've been seeing even on Twitter or X, a lot of actual indie companies making small, like 2D or 2.5D style games using AI to help AI, because not necessarily they know coding. So they would use AI to help with that process. And then I'm seeing a huge wave in terms of funding back into Web3 games. So Sony, they've actually launched their Web3 initiative called Sony Ninium, and it's backed by a star network, which is a layer two based off Ethereum's chain. So you're seeing a lot of distribution companies like even Epic Games are becoming more Web3 friendly. So that if anybody is listening and is interested in developing games, and your idea might be the next definitely take a look into Web3 games, take a look into AI development within coding and game development, because there is actually a good amount of resources to develop a small 2.5D type style game with AI, because we have that all in our hands now and it's all accessible. So definitely check it out.
No, it's amazing how many tools are out there. And Li Jie, if anyone in our audience wanted to learn more about Ink stories and learn more about your various efforts, what might you like? Is there an Ink Stories website they should visit, or what might you recommend them to do?
Yeah, they can go to www.inkstories.com for all the work of some titles that we've launched, as well as if you want to connect with me, you guys can connect with me on LinkedIn. Lijieou is my full name, or www.com, lijieou.com is my website. So that's it.
It's really incredible. I mean, some of the game and concepts that Ink Stories has put out dealing with things like the Iranian Revolution.
Revolution.
Someone sitting in Charlotte, North Carolina, doesn't
Mhm.
automatically think of the Iranian Revolution as
Yeah.
the first or second idea, but to see that put out there as a narrative in the baseline of an immersive experience, sort of like as
Yeah.
a photojournalist, it's really remarkable.
Yeah, and we've actually had so many emails from the people in the Middle East thanking, the founder to even just tap on to a game like this, because especially when it comes to such a heavy, heartfelt game when it comes to political matters, not a lot of game developers actually try to push that idea of creating a game, something similar to 1979, or at least something a little bit more politically driven, controversially. So bringing at least the voicing of why it matters kind of just provides the initial voicing for middle people in the Middle East that are suffering. Um, and it provides at least a perspective, especially for 1979. It was based off the background of the founder, who also who grew up in Iran, in the streets of Iran as well, and there's a lot of suppression and things like that. So It was such a heartfelt indie game that got launched, and yeah, there's so many awesome titles that Ink Stories has produced, and definitely check it out. All available on PC, mobile, as well as Xbox. So
So, Li Jie, thank you very much for an informative discussion off the beaten path of a lot of our typical topics on the next big thing, but certainly an important growth area that anyone thinking of thematics and thematic investing should be looking at gaming. It could be one of those key catalysts for different types of technologies, be it certain kinds of semiconductors, hardware, virtual reality, augmented reality. The list goes on, and you know the NVIDIA GTC conference, as I mentioned, is occurring as we're doing this recording,
yes,
and they're absolutely talking a lot about gaming. So before we conclude, I have to state the following to clarify: the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of Wisdom Tree and Li Jie and Ink Stories, and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities, and reliance upon them is at the sole discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. Thank you again, Li Jie. Thank you to our audience. We'll look forward to coming back on our next episode. Take care.